They say it's not about the size, but more what you do with it. And that is definitely a quote and conversation that's directly pointed at Battlefield 6 and definitely shouldn't be misinterpreted for anything else. Now, if you're like me, you've probably been wallowing away in tears and self-pity as a result of Battlefield 6's beta ending. But on the flip side of that coin, you probably finished the beta sitting there thinking, this is Battlefield, and I've enjoyed what I've played so far, but it does feel like it's missing something. And it dawned on me whilst darting around in a jet on Liberation Peak, the only map where jets and helicopters were available for us to use, that despite it feeling like a Battlefield game, without the bigger map experience, the Battlefield 6 beta didn't really feel like Battlefield. Now, to be perfectly clear, the Battlefield 6 beta was a lot of fun. I nearly clocked well into 100 hours in that beta. I had a great time with the gunplay and mechanics, the destruction felt fantastic, the gunplay felt enjoyable, and there was a lot to appreciate there from a Battlefield fan's perspective. And the one map where we were allowed a combined arms experience in Liberation Peak, despite it being one of the more questionable maps in terms of snipers and camping, still had its moments where it kind of shined through and showcased what a combined arms chaotic environment could look like for Battlefield 6. But there was no shaking the feeling that Battlefield 6 felt small. And I have seen entire conversations on the internet at this point questioning, will Battlefield 6 have a big map? Has Battlefield 6 deliberately downscaled some of the bigger maps so that they won't be the same sizes that we remembered, like Operation Firestorm? And have they changed the ethos of the franchise by reducing the map sizes to seemingly cater to a larger audience? So I decided to do some digging into some information and a little bit of investigating to really get to the bottom of the barrel of this question as to whether or not Battlefield 6 has those larger maps and experiences, and if it will be enough. As a little disclaimer, this will be the first time on this channel that I cover things that are considered to be leaked or rumored to be leaked, and it should always be noted that these things should be taken with a pinch of salt. Any leak or any coverage of a leak could potentially build false expectations for what might be there at release, and we want to avoid that completely. So just as a little disclaimer, when we start to talk about post-season content in this video, take that with a very large pinch of salt. And if you are new to this channel, or if you're a regular on this channel who simply isn't subscribed, please hit the sub button. We're on the road to 200k, and a little cheeky like does go a long way too. Now, the Battlefield 6 beta was successful and a bit of a shame in a number of ways, because it was successful in the sense that it's the most played beta in Steam history, and probably the most played beta in Battlefield history. And having a larger audience potentially picking up the game probably means more sales probably means more long-term support for the game, more long-term support means more maps, so there's a lot to appreciate on that front. But it definitely did feel like a shame in the sense that we didn't get much of a real Battlefield experience except for Liberation Peak, which I would consider personally to be a medium minus map. Not a medium map, not a medium plus map, a medium minus map at best. Now, I do appreciate how Liberation Peak handled its mountain ranges to try and allow helicopters and jets space to breathe and give them room to operate in those environments, even though it was a slightly more condensed environment. That was definitely something that, as a helicopter and jet player, greatly appreciated. And every once in a while on Liberation Peak, you would get those glimpses of moments where you were like, if this was a larger map and larger scale, this kind of level of chaos would be a lot of fun on some of these objectives. But because it was so condensed, it was a little bit difficult to get that breathing room that you anticipate in a Battlefield game. And as I've said before, both to Battlefield directly and publicly, downtime in Battlefield is not a bad thing. The entire franchise has definitely had a bit of a bad stigma for being boring or too open at times, but in Battlefield, a little bit of downtime in between objectives is certainly not the wrong thing to have. And the 4 maps that we received in the beta essentially had no downtime. You were constantly in the thick of it, constantly in the heat of battle, and whilst that's really fun and engaging, every once in a while you want a palate cleanser. A larger map can be a slice of ginger or a little bit of wasabi that makes the next smaller map experience feel a little bit more refreshing. Instead, because we got these smaller maps, which ultimately did help the game and the beta cater to a wider audience, we didn't really get that refreshing experience, we didn't really get that true Battlefield experience, and honestly, it made a lot of the maps feel quite samey. Despite the fact that Empire State and Siege of Cairo are very different, and arguably 2 really solid maps, I actually think Empire State got a pretty poor public reception because people had played so much of the smaller maps that it just felt like another meat grinder, when in reality it actually has some pretty fun gameplay, and I think it was kind of a shame to see them condensed back to back. So let's get to the bottom of the barrel of the question of, does Battlefield 6 have large maps? Well, the answer is yes. There are a handful of them, and there probably will be at least 4 that we could consider to be large-scale maps. The largest map in Battlefield 6 is the upcoming Mirak Valley. Very little is known about Mirak Valley, and it actually didn't feature by the looks of it in the reveal trailer or the gameplay trailer at all for Battlefield 6. It is the largest map in the game and features every single type of vehicle and has been described as a sprawling war zone. The only thing we do know about Mirak Valley is that it appears to be set in the same biome as Liberation Peak, namely being in Tajikistan. The smaller map below that is the return of Operation Firestorm. Now, Operation Firestorm is a very beloved Battlefield 3 map and features land and air vehicles, so basically every type of vehicle again. And I saw a lot of rumors online that people had assumed that Operation Firestorm has been downscaled. Now, I can't exactly say where, who, how, what, when, why, or where, but I can safely tell you that that probably isn't the case, and that Operation Firestorm is going to be a like-for-like remaster almost perfectly. And if you don't completely believe me, the screenshots on screen from the trailer will make it pretty evidently clear that the scale of Operation Firestorm is exactly the scale that you would remember it to be. There hasn't been a concentrated effort by the looks of things to remove parts of the map or scale back parts of the map or change the play space so that it doesn't function the way Operation Firestorm is supposed to function. And yes, that even includes the weird campy snipers who like to sit on the side of the hill. The next largest map below Operation Firestorm, and seemingly not massively smaller than Operation Firestorm, is New Sebek City. Now, New Sebek City seemingly has a bit of a Gulf of Oman feel to it, because you could see it in the trailer where it featured transport vehicles, it clearly featured ground vehicles. There's a little bit of a question mark as to whether or not jets will make an entry into this map, although I would be surprised if they didn't, given the scale of the map. And New Sebek City looks to be essentially some kind of Gulf of Oman modern hybrid. Think of it as Gulf of Oman, but rather than having the gigantic gap in the ocean where people come ashore, it is just the urban environment from the beach onwards, and you're likely going to see some very large roadways in and out of the city as essential spawn points. What's really interesting from the trailer and what you can see about New Sebek City is that despite it being a dense urban environment in the middle of the actual map itself, there's actually a lot of space between that dense urban environment, and I think that's really important, providing verticality and a reasonable amount of space for people to actually get some downtime, reload their guns, have a think, and move on to the next point or move on to the next objective. I actually think New Sebek City has the potential, just from the brief glimpses you see of it in the trailer, to be a fan favorite map. Just purely because of the layout of it, purely because of the way maps like Strike at Karkand and Gulf of Oman have been successful because of the way some of those urban sprawls have played out. And I think they're going for a very similar vibe and a very similar level of success. Now, it's difficult to extract from a trailer whether or not something is going to be destructible, because some of it is just ultimately fan service, blowing some stuff up, and somebody actually did do the math and calculations as to just how many helicopters perished in the original Battlefield 6 trailer. But it's safe to say that these hollowed out shells and tower blocks very clearly have a large degree of destruction to them and have probably been designed to factor in destruction. Now, whether or not all of them will be completely collapsible is an entirely different question, and probably part of the reason you haven't seen maps like New Sebek City, Mirak Valley, and also Operation Firestorm is simply because they do take longer to complete, and also longer to test to make sure that the physics and the map pool and the memory and the bandwidth that all of that is using is working correctly. So, on the one hand, the Battlefield 6 beta likely featured the most polished maps, and other than a few glitches of getting behind and into things that people shouldn't have, and getting onto rooftops that people shouldn't have, I think we could safely say they were fairly polished maps. But applying that same level of polish to something substantially larger can be a little bit challenging. So I would classify New Sebek City as a medium plus map, and Operation Firestorm and Mirak Valley as a large map. So depending on your flavoring of things, you might also classify New Sebek City as a large map as well. Now, the biggest question mark is Manhattan Bridge. Now, this map is located below the Manhattan Bridge and is in the same biome as Empire State, but does feature at the bare minimum helicopters as well as land vehicles. So this is a larger scale variant of Empire State, and I don't think it's taking place even in the same location in terms of the map just being scaled upwards. I think this is literally an entire separate section of the New York biome and its own bespoke map. And you could see an actual crashing helicopter in the Empire State sequence, implying this is going to be something probably similar scaled, if not slightly larger than something like Battlefield 5's Rotterdam. Now, I would consider Rotterdam, and by extension of that, probably what we're going to see from Manhattan Bridge to be a medium to medium minus map, which leaves us ultimately with 3 large maps or 2 large maps and 1 medium plus map. Now, towards the end of the video, this is where we're going to be commenting on a potential leak or data mine, which is the rough approximate size of Mirak Valley and also approximately a new map called Eastwood. Now, Mirak Valley, we definitely know does exist, and definitely does appear to be the largest map, or actually is 100% the largest map as confirmed by the guys over at EA. Now, Eastwood is allegedly the first map that we are going to see in Battlefield 6 in Season 1. Now, take this again with a very large pinch of salt, because some people initially misinterpreted this to be a section of the Battle Royale map instead. And there's a very real likelihood, and probably a healthy likelihood, that that is also the case. If I'm EA and DICE, there's no way I'm not using the assets and biome that I've created for an entire BR map to not at least make 1 or 2 regular-sized multiplayer maps. And if it is really true that Eastwood is the first map that we're going to see in Season 1, and that it is a large-scale map akin to something like New Subec City and Mirak Valley, then that means we're pumping that number up to more like 4 or 5 maps that are large-scale, and being complemented by, again, another 4 or 5 smaller-scale maps that really creates a nice dynamic, I think, at the launch of Battlefield 6. Now, we have no idea what the cadence for future updates are going to be. We have no idea how much content to anticipate. We have no idea how many maps we should be anticipating per season. But if this game is being as successful as the beta would intend it to be, and also if you factor in the fact that it's not just DICE making maps anymore, Motive are making maps, it looks like Ripple Effect will probably be making maps, we're talking about a fairly large upscale tick in terms of the number of different development teams as a whole in Battlefield Studios who are leveraging map designers for this game. And I think it's safe to say that the expectation from the community is at the bare minimum we should expect to see 2 maps per season. And I think EA and DICE, and by extension Battlefield Studios, are very much aware that that is the expectation. We do know as well that Battlefield Portal is going to allow us to mess around with certain elements of maps and change how placements are and remove certain objects and reshuffle certain objects, and I would be incredibly surprised if Battlefield didn't release blank canvas maps that were set in certain biomes with slightly different layouts to allow us to create our own maps for ourselves. That would be something that would be a free home run for them, something that they could add to the game if one of those maps happens to be super successful, and something I think I could see being a huge success for this game. But again, that is currently speculation. And Eastwood is also speculation that should be taken with a large grain of salt. But I think it's safe to say that there will be that Battlefield large map experience that people are anticipating. And there was a very obvious decision by EA and DICE and Battlefield Studios to show off the smaller scale maps and higher intensity maps to not only attract wider audiences, but also probably because they just were the most finished and most polished maps available to them. 9 maps or 10 maps after Season 1 is probably about right for most Battlefield releases, but I do think there is going to be a hunger and expectation to see larger scale maps in this game sooner rather than later. Now, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comment section down below, folks. How do you feel about larger scale maps in Battlefield 6? Is it something that is a necessity for you to buy this game? Make sure you drop a like, drop a sub, and I'll catch you again in the next one.